Nanda Pulalochanai Sasambramairavyupeta Kavishad Rajamandiram. With wide open eyes, the members of the royal household came forward in a flurry to lovingly greet Lord Mukunda, and thus the Lord entered the royal palace. Kritavilokya Vratreyam Krishnam Tribhuvaneshwaram Kritatmaktokaya Sankitat Tasnucha Paristasvade. When Queen Prita saw her nephew Krishna, the master of the three worlds, her heart became filled with love. Rising from her couch with her daughter-in-law, she embraced the Lord. Purport. Queen Kunti's daughter-in-law is the famous Draupadi. Madhyanatimrandhasya Dhyananjana Shalakaya Chakshuranmaditamena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. Krishna knows how to make an entrance. We see him making entrances at different times in the Srimad Bhagavatam. This is one of those important ones. Here Krishna is traveling to Indraprastha. In the Mahabharata we hear about the creation of Indraprastha. Just a little bit of the story. Of course, the Kurus were always trying to destroy the Pandavas, so they sent them to a house on vacation and lit the house on fire. Of course, they escaped from that and they hid for a while. But when they returned from that, somehow or other, Vidura and others convinced Dhritarashtra to give them half the kingdom. So Dhritarashtra gave half the kingdom to the Pandavas. And in that they're part of the kingdom, they built this city, Indraprastha. And it's described in the Mahabharata, and it's like these descriptions we hear about Dwarka and other places, this amazing opulence and so on. So that's where they're living at this time. And the chronology is, at this time, Krishna is about 74 years old. It came up recently, the procession, Mother Ekadashi Brata mentioned it all, that 16,000 queens were there, and I thought, well, is that true or not? 16,000 queens. So, yes, it's true, according to the chronology, because the queens were present at the time of the solar eclipse at Kurukshetra, because when Draupadi was speaking to the queens, asking them how they married Krishna, they're all telling their stories. So one queen named Rohini, she spoke on behalf of the 16,100 queens. So that was actually about 30 years before. Krishna was about 44 years old when that took place. So this is about 30 years later. So he has all these queens, 16,108 queens. They're making this procession into the city. I was thinking we have a parade the Gainesville parade, and they have, 150 floats or something. So imagine 16,108 floats. Must have taken some time. So it's a long procession, and what I find interesting is it comes up in different times. The ladies are coming out to see Krishna, and the men are in bed. So what's with these guys anyway? They're always in bed. I don't know what's going on with the men. The men are sleeping, and the ladies are out climbing to the rooftops, eager to see Krishna. So maybe there's some poetic license there to show how eager the ladies were. They left their husbands lying in bed. This big parade is going on. So we have some description of what's going on here. Now we have other descriptions. In the first canto of the Bhagavatam, we have Krishna. Of course, the way it plays out there after the battle of Kurukshetra, that's where we first start hearing about Krishna in the Bhagavatam in the 7th chapter of the first canto, when Ashwatthama is trying to finish off the Pandavas. And so that's after the battle of Kurukshetra. So Krishna spends some time after the battle of Kurukshetra. He spends some time in Hastinapur. And then he returns to Dwarka. So at that time we hear a description of Krishna entering into Dwarka. I'll just read a few verses from that. That's the 11th chapter, the first canto. O lotus-eyed Lord, whenever you go away to Mathura, Vrindavan, or Hastinapur to meet your friends and relatives, every moment of your absence seems like millions of years. O infallible one, at that time our eyes become useless, as if bereft of sun. when He's not there. When Krishna's not there for them to see, their eyes are useless. This verse, by the way, it says, when you go away to Mathura Vrindavan, the Sanskrit word there is Madhu. So Mathura or Mathura Vrindavan is called Madhupuri. So our acharyas, especially Jiva Goswami, he uses this verse to justify his position that Krishna does return to Vrindavan. Krishna says, I will return. When he left Vrindavan, he said, I will return. So in this verse, it says that sometimes you return to Vrindavan. This is a confirmation that Krishna did actually sometimes return to Vrindavan to see the residents there. So also in this description of Krishna's return to Dwarka, when Lord Krishna passed over the public roads, all the ladies from respectable families of Dwarka went up to the roofs of their palaces just to have a look at the Lord. They considered this to be the greatest festival. So here again we have them climbing up on the roofs. It's so nice, houses with roofs, isn't it? In India they still have roofs. It's nice to go up on the roof. I used to go up on my roof just because I like to be up higher or something. And get a nice view. But we don't have that so much now. So that opulence was there. Ladies were able to go. Prabhupada says in one purport how the streets are crowded. Well, actually, it came up today also in this verse. The streets are so crowded with soldiers and, this huge parade going on. So they could see better. Just like if you go to Jagannath Puri for Rath Yatra, if you're lucky, you can get a vantage point from one of the houses or hotels on Grand Road, and you can sit above the throng and look down and see the Rath Yatra festival, get a nice view there. So then it says, the inhabitants of Dwarka were regularly accustomed to look upon the reservoir of all beauty, the infallible Lord, yet they were never satiated. So this, of course, is an important point. They see Krishna every day. When he's in Dwarka, they see him every day, but they're so eager to see him. They never get tired. Nityotsavam natatripo drishi bhakti pibantyo. This is a line from a verse in the 9th canto. It says that Krishna's face is like a festival. When you're looking at it, well, just like this whole scene here, there's so much to see, or a parade, there's so much to see. So you would think, well, someone's face, how much is there to see? Eyes, nose, mouth, cheeks. But Krishna's face is like a festival. It's like looking and seeing something new. Every time they look, it's new, fresh. They're drinking it with their eyes. The Pana Patram, this was in this verse today. Krishna's face is like liquid beauty, and you drink that liquid beauty. It's a container, a reservoir of liquid beauty, and you drink that with your eyes. So you never get, it's amrita, it's nectar. You never get satiated, you never get full, you never get tired of it, you never lose your taste for it. So finally, another verse from this particular Leela of Krishna entering Dwarka. As the Lord passed along the public road of Dwarka, his head was protected from the sunshine by a white umbrella. White hair fans moved in semicircles, in other words, chamars, and showers of flowers fell upon the road. His yellow garments and garlands of flowers made it appear as if a dark cloud were surrounded simultaneously by the sun, the moon, a rainbow, and lightning. So the purport describes how we usually don't see all of these things at the same time. Actually, when you do, it's very beautiful. Like when it rains and the sun is shining, and then, of course, that's when rainbows happen, so sometimes you see all these at the same time. Maybe the moon might even be shining out at the same time. That happens occasionally. But when you see all of these natural, beautiful phenomena at the same time, oh, it's very wonderful. So that's Krishna. He's the dark cloud, and then we have this imagery of these other things. So Krishna also made a grand entrance into Mathura when he left Vrindavan. Of course, it was how we have the heartbreaking scene of Krishna leaving all the Brajvasis. But then he enters into Mathura, and they've heard about Krishna there. And actually, Krishna's exploits are known by everyone. The word travels around. He's so amazing that it can't be contained. The news can't be contained in Vrindavan. It gets spread all over the place. We even hear Bhishma, he's talking about Krishna and the gopis on his deathbed. So this news was spread everywhere. So people had heard about Krishna. Now, especially the ladies, they're so eager to see Krishna. So we have a nice description there. I'll just read through some of the verses. We'll do a lot of reading today because there's some real nice things. So this is Krishna's entrance into Mathura. The women of Mathura hurriedly assembled and went forth to see the two sons of Vasudeva as they entered the city on the king's road, surrounded by their cowherd boyfriends. So now they're not coming with their queens yet. Krishna doesn't have his queens, he just has his cowherd boyfriend. Some of the women, my dear king, eagerly climbed to the roofs of their houses to see them. This is a repeated theme. Some of the ladies put their clothes and ornaments on backwards, so they're so excited. Finally, Krishna's coming. We've heard so much about him. Now he's coming. Others forgot one of their earrings or ankle belts, and others applied makeup to one eye but not the other. Those who were taking their meals abandoned them. Others went out without finishing their baths or massages. Women who were sleeping at once rose when they heard the commotion. The mothers breastfeeding their infants simply put them aside. There's a little commentary here by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. He said the word sotsavaha indicates that those who were engaged in such activities as getting married abandoned the activity. I now pronounce you zoop. There she goes. Even brides in the process of being married fail to complete their circumambulation of their husband. Hey, where'd she go? The lotus-eyed Lord smiling as he recalled his bold pastime. So this is nice too. Krishna's smiling. So what's on his mind as he's walking into town? He's thinking of the things that he did back in Vrindavan. His bold pastime. He captivated those ladies' minds with his glances. He walked with the gait of a lordly elephant in rut, creating a festival for their eyes with his transcendental body, which is the source of pleasure for the divine goddess of fortune. The ladies of Mathura had repeatedly heard about Krishna, and thus as soon as they saw him, their hearts melted. They felt honored that he was sprinkling upon them the nectar of his glances and broad smiles. Taking him into their hearts through their eyes, they embraced him, the embodiment of all ecstasy. And as their bodily hairs stood on end, O subduer of enemies, they forgot the unlimited distress caused by his absence. Their lotus faces blooming with affection, the ladies who had climbed to the roofs of the mansions rained down showers of flowers upon Lord Balaram and Lord Krishna. The women of Mathura exclaimed, "Oh, what severe austerities the gopis must have performed to be able to regularly see Krishna and Balaram, who are the greatest source of pleasure for all mankind." So we have these scenes of Dwaraka, Mathura, and Indraprastha. So whenever Krishna enters these places, it's an amazing scene. But the most amazing of all places, of course, is Goloka Vrindavan. In the Brihad Bhagavatamrita, we have the culmination of Gopakumar's travels as he's getting deeper and deeper realizations of his own, about Krishna's avatars and different intimate relationships, increasingly intimate relationships devotees can have with Krishna, and also how the higher and higher levels of these devotees, their devotion to Krishna and surrender. One thing we should remember here is, in fact, it came up in a couple of these verses, it said that the ladies were eager to have the service of Krishna. So this isn't just about the, you might say, sense gratification, transcendental sense gratification of seeing Krishna's beauty, but ultimately it's about wanting to serve Krishna. We have so many prayers and so on of the gopis talking about how beautiful Krishna is and so on. But they're, in their heart of hearts, what their desire is to serve Krishna. That's the highest ecstasy. So Gopakumar, he's seeing how these devotees are so surrendered to Krishna. And he finally, towards the end of Brihad Bhagavatamrita, he makes it to Goloka Vrindavan, in the spiritual world. So at first he always he wishes something and he just ends up there. So he's in this place and at first he's not sure where he is. He's a little bewildered and he sees people, they also look bewildered. And he starts asking, who's the king of this place? Whose place is this? He wants to find out where he is. And he's not getting any reply. But finally, he gets a reply. So I'm going to read this. Now this is quite long. This is about, I timed it last night. It took me 12 minutes to read it. But I think you'll enjoy it. Just drink the nectar through your ears because it's really wonderful. Gopakumar returning. And then this, because the context is that Krishna is going to be returning from the pasturing ground. So here's another entrance by Krishna. He's entering from the forest into the village of Braja. Trying to subdue my agitated joy, he's already in ecstasy, he's just arrived here, I haven't seen Krishna yet. I walked forward and came across a seated elderly gentleman sobbing profusely, incessantly chanting, Krishna, Krishna. With some skillful effort, I made him speak, and I heard him say in a choked voice that this town belonged to Nanda, the king of the cowherds, Sri Krishna's father. As soon as I heard those words, I fainted, overcome with delight. I'm just reading the translations. There are some very nice commentaries by Gopi Pranadhan, but to save time, I'm just reading the translations. After a moment, that compassionate old man revived me, and I ran ahead and approached a gateway of the town and sat there in the gate. And there I saw, by the hundreds of thousands and tens of millions, all sorts of wonders unseen, unheard of, unimaginable by anyone in this world. O best of Brahmanas, I couldn't discern whether the people there were all enjoying the highest bliss or suffering in the grip of terrible misery. I heard the gopi songs coupled with their crying, but were they songs of the greatest contentment or the greatest sorrow? I couldn't tell. A person seeing that place might think he was in the material world, but by carefully reflecting on whatever he had seen before, he would understand he was now somewhere above all material planets, all higher non-planetary regions, and all the transcendental realms of the spiritual world. Then an elderly lady came by. I bowed down to her and asked in a plaintive voice where Sri Nandana was playing today. The elderly lady said, This morning that giver of life to us Brajvasis went into the dense forest to play with his cows and friends and his respected elder brother. Later, at dusk, he will return. All the Brajvasis are waiting on this path along the Yamuna, their eyes transfixed on the road. These trees stand with leaves erect, eagerly awaiting the chance to see him. Surely he will come along this path. Sri Gopakumar said, as if anointed by a downpour of the purest nectar, I gazed with one pointed attention down the path the old lady had pointed out. The sheer force of my ecstasy had frozen my thighs, but with some effort I moved on, and I heard from afar a certain sound. Mixed with the mooing of cows, it was the supremely attractive murmur of Krishna's enchanting flute. That sound, sweet melodies of sportingly played notes, diverse with musical embellishments, was like nothing ever heard in the material world. Its attractive force at once overwhelmed everyone in the cowherd's village. The power of that sound, by the power of that sound, sap flowed in a downpour from the long rows of trees. A flood of tears fell from the eyes of every embodied being in the village of the cowherds. A shower of milk rained from the breasts of all of Krishna's mothers, even the elderly, and the rapid currents of the Yamuna suddenly stood still. I didn't know whether that flute gave out poison or the nectar of immortality, whether its sound was harsh like thunder or soft like water, hotter than blazing fire or cooler than the moon. I couldn't tell. But that sound drove all the Brajvasis mad. All of them were utterly bewildered. Then I saw some women of Braja come out of their homes, bearing in their hands the things needed to greet Krishna with worship. Others who passed by held ornaments and offerings of food on their heads. Other ladies, ignoring everything around them, ran toward the mingled sounds of the mooing of the cows and the song of the flute. In the frenzy of love for Krishna, the ladies stumbled down the path. Some ladies ran with their ornaments in disarray. Some could hardly keep their belts and hair tied. Some stayed in their homes, stunned like trees, and others fell unconscious to the ground. Some of the women who had fainted, their faces wet with tears and saliva, were carried forward by their girlfriends. Other ladies, pained by the urges of their love for Krishna, went ahead, pressed on by their friends. Come see him! The ladies, so diverse in complexion, adorned with diverse ornaments and dress, put to shame the good fortune of the goddess of fortune herself. Swiftly the ladies ran to the bank of the Yamuna, absorbed in singing his names and pastimes. I too went forward, as if pulled by someone. Joining the throng of gopis rushing forward on all sides, I too began to run quickly. The young gopis came out of their houses and rushed in groups to the path along the Yamuna by which Krishna was expected to return. These gopis were more fortunate and more beautiful than even Mahalakshmi, the wife of Lord Narayan. Then from a distance I saw him, his charming flute in hand. Running quickly, he emerged from among his friends and animals and approached me, saying in a sweet voice, "Look, Sri Dhamma, here is my dear friend Sarupa, the sun who shines on the lotus of your family." Krishna was dressed for the forest. His garments, earrings, and peacock feather crown all swayed to and fro, and so did his garland of kadamba flowers. His fragrance perfumed all directions, and his beautiful lotus face blossomed with a playful smile. His lotus eyes beamed with a merciful glance, and the varied assets of beauty decorated him in a singular way. The fingers of his lotus hand busily pushed back the locks of his hair, which flew about, adorned with the dust raised by the cows. His tender divine lotus feet touched the surface of the earth just to grant her the gift of supreme splendor. Playfully glancing as they moved, they attracted everyone's heart with their great eagerness to walk quickly with large steps. The effulgence of his cloud-colored body, shining with the full sweetness of youth, lit up all corners of the sky. His beauty, which captured the hearts of the ever-dear devotees of Vraja, was an ocean abounding with countless excellences. He leaped forward and came close to me, compelled by the affection of his helpless devotee. I fainted in love at seeing him. He caught hold of me by the neck, and suddenly he too fell to the ground. A moment later I reawoke and carefully freed my neck from his grasp. I stood up and saw him on the ground, unconscious. Covered with dust, he was moistening the path with his tears. Some gopis came and said, "Look, who has come here? What has he done? He has put our life and soul into such a state. Alas, alas, just see, people of Vraja, now we are all dead. This must be some servant of that great wizard Kamsa." Lamenting like this in many ways, the gopis cried loudly in distress as they surrounded Krishna. Then from behind Krishna, several groups of cowherds quickly approached. Seeing him in such a state, they cried with pitiful voices. Far away in the village, Nanda and the other elder cowherds heard this terrible sound of crying. So too did Yashoda, ever affectionate to her son, and so did the other elder ladies and the maidservants. Together they all ran to that place, their feet stumbling on the path. Bewildered, they too cried, "Alas, alas!" Then the cows and bulls and calves came there, and the black deer and other animals. Seeing Krishna in that state, they wept in agony. The animals, all crying out in love, their faces drenched with floods of tears, approached Krishna one by one and gently smelled and licked him again and again. Great numbers of birds flying overhead told also of their misery by making a tumultuous noise that sounded like people crying. And the immobile creatures, in great pain within, seemed suddenly to dry up. What more is there to say? All beings, moving and non-moving, were on the verge of death. As for me, I was drowning in a vast ocean of sorrow. Confused about what to do, severely tormented, I put Krishna's feet on my head and began profusely sobbing and lamenting. Then Balabhadra, Krishna's older brother, quickly arrived from some distance away, full of fear. White-complexioned and arrayed in blue garments, he appeared charming. for he was the same age as Krishna and as nicely dressed. Lord Balabhadra, that most skillful of persons, cried for a moment, then seemed to regain his composure and looked all around. With great care and attention, he made me hold his younger brother by the neck with my arms. He wiped Krishna's beautiful limbs clean with my hand and made me loudly call out to him with many plaintive cries. Then he made me lift Krishna up from the ground. Suddenly Krishna opened his eyes, sealed till then by a flood of tears. Seeing me, he joyfully embraced and kissed me. But then he looked around and became embarrassed. That best of lords took my hand in his own left lotus hand, and received me as a long-lost bosom friend. He asked me various questions. Then he greeted all the people of Braja and entered the best of cowherd villages with the gait of an elephant. The forest animals were miserable because now they had to part from him. Unable to go anywhere without him, they simply stood at the entrance of the village, ready to spend the entire night there in the hope of seeing their Lord again the next morning. The birds flew here and there high over the village to watch him, but when night came and they could no longer see him, they cried out as if weeping and flew away. At the insistence of Nanda Maharaj, who was anxious with love for his sons, just after milking the cows, the two brothers went to their home. They went home at once, not even giving the cows proper attention. Mother Yashoda quickly came to meet the boys, her clothing and body wet with the milk flowing from her breast and the tears that flooded from her eyes in love. Together with Rohini, she offered lamps to both brothers, worshipping each limb of their bodies again and again. Yashoda performed arati to her son Krishna by caressing him with her own hair and affectionately embraced and kissed him. She couldn't decide whether she ought to keep him on her head, at her breast, or within her womb to protect him. So it goes on from there with that stuff. You hear about Krishna going home and taking his meal and so many other wonderful pastimes there in that Srimad Bhagavatamrita. So this is our goal in life, isn't it? We want to join this pastime. We don't want to stay sleeping in bed like the man in this story. We want to, of course, what does it require? It requires the eagerness of these devotees that we're hearing about. So eager to see Krishna. Then that's what Krishna will respond to that. And our desire is so intense that he will respond and give us his darshan and allow us to enter into his service. Give us that adhikar, that privilege to engage in his devotional service. So I'll stop here. If anyone's not stunned, you can ask a question. Janashni today.
Could you give again a brief overview of the chronology, including where Battle of Kurukshetra falls?
Well, now, I'll go back to, the Kurukshetra eclipse was about 40 years, but Krishna was like 44 years old. Then when Yudhishthira was 76 years old, that's when he performed the Rajasuya sacrifice. So Krishna is about 3 years younger than him, so depending on what time of year it is. Krishna was something like 74 years old at this time. So Yudhishthira was 76, so just after the Rajasuya sacrifice, remember hearing there's a chapter in the Bhagavatam, in the Krishna book that was called How Duryodhana Felt Insulted After the Rajasuya Sacrifice. So Duryodhana went to Indraprastha after the Rajasuya sacrifice, and that's when he was embarrassed because he thought it was land, but he thought it was a floor, but it was actually water, and he fell, and then the Pandavas all laughed at him, and so he was upset. So it kind of increased his envy and hatred of the Pandavas. So it was only 4 months after Rajasuya that the gambling match took place. So after the gambling match, then that's when, of course, the Pandavas went into exile for 13 years. So when they returned from that, it wasn't long after that the Battle of Kurukshetra took place. So Krishna was then like 89 or 90 years old. during the Battle of Kurukshetra. And Krishna, according to the Bhagavatam, there's actually a sloka in the Bhagavatam. A lot of this information, well, it comes from our acharyas, also from the Mahabharata. But in the Bhagavatam, there's a sloka that says that Krishna was on the earth for 125 years. So it's something like 36 years after Kurukshetra is when Krishna wound up his pastimes. So that's how it unfolds.
How does the time factor work when Krishna is here?
It works how Krishna wants it to work. Just like we were hearing about Narada Muni visiting all these different palaces of the 16,108 queens. So we could see how things were happening at different times in different periods of, it would have been Krishna's lives. He had young sons and then they were growing up or they were getting married and then later they were coming back home. And so all of these things were happening simultaneously at the same time, basically the same day. Narada's visiting all these places. So Krishna controls time. He makes it happen however he wants to. Just like we hear in the Rasa dance, it was a night of Brahma. So we might think, well, Krishna was on earth at that time. What was going on, with the rest of the world? Was that a night of Brahma too? How could that be? So this is, of course, Krishna's internal potency, his Swarup Shakti. All this takes place in Krishna's internal potency. So because it's taking place on another sphere, another platform, another realm, then anything is possible. So Krishna controls time according to his desire, or Lila Shakti controls time to enhance his pastime. So in one sense, of course, like everything in Goloka Vrindavan, the time there is also achintya, it's inconceivable. We think of time because things progress step by step, pastimes take place. We even have the word pastime. So things pass in time, but in one sense they don't pass. In the local Vrindavan, Lord Brahma says, not a moment passes. But it does in some other sense, that it's inconceivable to us. So the simple answer is time does whatever Krishna wants it to do in his Leela. Yes, Maharaj?
So just one question, just one comment. How time goes into Goloka Vrindavan, I cannot explain. But on earth, like, for example, we know that Krishna spoke Bhagavad Gita in 3102 BC, and that can be calculated by some indication after the Bible.
Right, yeah. So yeah, there is an actual time that Krishna was on this earth. As I say, he was here 125 years. And certain astrological calculations are done to arrive at this date, 3102 BC. So yes, in that sense, Krishna does, when he comes to this world, in one sense he enters into this three-dimensional space, although he's transcendental to it. So he also enters into this time frame somehow and appears to act in normal time. But at the same time, in the course of his Leela, things happen that don't fit the time frame exactly. I mean, just like this. So as I was saying, a parade takes a couple of hours, but if you have 16,000 floats in the parade, that's going to take a long time. So these things we can't. When Krishna, of course, wherever Krishna is, that's Vrindavan. So he can create the spiritual world, and anything can happen, anything's possible when Krishna's present there.
So, given all the other personalities who are aging, Krishna still stays at like 25. His body never really ages. He remains like a 25-year-old.
Yeah, well, actually, 16-year-old.
Yeah. Whereas everyone else, their body will change.
Well, not everyone, actually. I was just reading in the Gopal Champu last night, so I think that, in fact, I was thinking of this, when Krishna met the gopis at Kurukshetra, were they old, middle-aged, and Krishna was just 16 years old? No, I don't think so. In fact, I read in Gopal Champu, it says the cowherd boy, when Krishna returns, because in Gopal Champu, Krishna returns finally and stays in Vrindavan, the way Jiva Goswami has written it. In fact, actually, Krishna never leaves Vrindavan. That's just an illusion. Vasudev leaves. Krishna, Swayam Bhagavan, Shyam Sundar, he never leaves Vrindavan. But he's not manifest in some way. So in any case, Jiva Goswami says the cowherd boys, when Krishna returned to play as a cowherd boy, he changed his dress before he entered Vrindavan. He put on a cowherd boy's dress instead of the princely dress. He's coming from Dwarka. So he put on a cowherd boy's dress. But the cowherd boys were all the same age as when he had left them. Because by their own desire, they stayed the same age. So we have to remember in Goloka Vrindavan, whatever you desire, you get. You have the will, you have the power to do anything, to serve Krishna. So you can have any form you want. Even in Vaikuntha, residents of Vaikuntha can take any form they want to serve the Lord Vishnu. So in Goloka Vrindavan, the cowherd boys, they don't want to age, they're not going to age. So they didn't age. So at least the residents of Vrindavan, they're not aging, or at least they don't want to age, they're not aging. Now they have their eternal ages too. Mother Yashoda, she's a certain age. I mentioned before how Radha and Krishna are a certain age. I'm always forgetting what it is, but Krishna's like 15 years, 2 months, 7 days, or something like that. It's given exactly by the Acharyas. So they have their eternal ages, so they're not getting older. It's been 5,000 years since Krishna was here, so Radharani's not 5,000 years old now. Krishna's associates maintain their ages in their service to him. It's all about pleasing Krishna and serving Krishna. Remember? Excuse me, what? It's the third volume of Brihad Bhagavatamrita. It's one of the last chapters. You can tell by the title because it's something like, the ultimate something like that. I forget exactly. I think it may be the next to the last chapter of Brihad Bhagavatamrita. It's toward the end. Like the ultimate goal or something. I forget the title of it. That section I read starts about in the middle of the chapter, around verse 40 or 50, something like that. All right. Srila Prabhupada ki.